Hello, good morning. And I'm happy and surprised that so many of you have showed up to this somewhat unappetizing topic that early. Well, early, it's 10, but anyway. Well, since January 20th of this year, Donald Trump is back in office. But I think it feels, for a lot of us, at least for me, as if it was a lot longer than 4 months. And that's probably because Trump and his buddies just marched through. And that impression is true, partly. That's probably because the second Trump government is a lot more reckless than the first time, a lot more ruthless. And they have an entire political infrastructure behind it, which believes in the MAGA vision, but also this infrastructure is geared towards Donald Trump as a person and shows absolute loyalty, personal loyalty towards him. And that's the difference to the first time in office. Let's start with a brief inventory. It's probably out of the question after these few months. We're dealing with a government which is attacking the foundations of American democracy, which disenfranchises groups of people, intentionally ignores court rulings. In short, they're out of control. The executive branch is out of control. That makes it quite clear that it thinks executive powers stands above Congress and above the judiciary. At the same time, we're dealing with a government which has this leading figure, Donald Trump, and sees a representation of the amorphous will of the people, which stands above the law, according to their opinion. Now let's look at the MAGA coalition, which seems so monolithic from the outside. Which groups does this coalition consist of? What are the inner fractures, the lines of conflicts? And we're also dealing with who sets the tone of all these groups, if that is even answerable. One thing before, the American right has never been a monolithic bloc. Even in the early days, that means it consists of different groups with different ideological directions, but they have a common denominator, so they can work together as one political project and act together. So they can transcend the thematic disagreements, at least for a moment. This common denominator, this line, which holds together this rather unstable coalition, used to be anti-communism. It starts in the beginning of the American right being against Roosevelt and the New Deal, whom they saw as communist infiltration in the American right. And so even then, there was quite a broad coalition, ranging from right libertarian businessmen to fundamentalist preachers against, and were brought together against this. And this common denominator of anti-communism was durable for a few decades. But at the end of the Soviet Union, there was an ideological vacuum. That means there needs to be something that holds this coalition together again, some glue, so it doesn't fall apart for the American right. And in the recent decades, anti-communism was replaced by another ideology, which holds together the American right today, which is called white Christian nationalism. It's a cultural and political framework which takes the identities of being Christian, a very specific type of Christian, a right type of Christian, and being American, and it merges those two. At the core, it's about the question, who is, quote unquote, a real American. It's about belonging, it's about disenfranchising, exclusion, and white Christian nationalism has a strictly hierarchical biologist worldview, traditional gender roles, and in the daily news we see they want to cut rights of women, LGBTQ people, non-white people. So white Christian nationalism wants a society in which white, cis males are in charge. And that's not my interpretation. A lot of sociological studies about this topic show this. That sounds quite abstract. All right, so I gave you the definition of Christian nationalism, but since that is all a bit dry, I thought I'll bring a short video. And this video is a pretty good, well, unintentional summary of the vibes of white Christian nationalism. It's a propaganda video, an advertisement video, 2021, of Congressman Mattis Cause. Maybe some of you remember that. I say former congressperson. Now he's no longer in Congress. And that's not because the opinions that he is voicing in this video are too extreme. They are mainstream these days. But he lost his re-election for two reasons. He told in a podcast that prominent Republicans have parties with cocaine and sex, and that was not received well. And he changed his election district right before the election, and the voters did not like that. But that's the manifestation of white Christian nationalism, according to Madison Cawthon.
Spiritual battle going on Capitol Hill. The only way that we take our country back is when strong, God-fearing patriots decide it is time for us to stand up and say no to your tyranny. Now is a time for our pastors and our congregations, like this one here, like many of you that you represent. It's time for us to stand up and declare boldly that as men and women of faith, we have a duty to stand against tyranny. We have a duty to be civically involved. We have a duty to save this country for the next generation. Back into the Old Testament. Look at David, look at Daniel, look at Esther. Look at all these people who influenced the governments of their day to uphold Christian principles. It is time for the American Christian church to come out of the shadows, to say no longer are we going to allow our culture to be determined by people who hate the things that we believe in. We are going to stand valiantly for God's incredible, inerrant truths that predate any version of government. Because, my friends, if we lose this country today, if we bend the knee to the Democrats today, our country will be lost forever and our children will never know what freedom is. It's our duty to stand up. Let us stand united as men and women of faith to fight for our country.
Well, subtle is something else, but I think that shows quite well which narratives white Christian nationalism is using. And sociologists, Philip Gorski and Sam Perry, have, and I think that's quite helpful, looking at MAGA coalition as well as the actions of the Trump government, talked about the trinity of Christian nationalism in their book, The Flag and the Cross. The trinity: freedom, order, and violence. Freedom for us, for the real Americans, for the righteous Christians. Order means our order for everyone else, independent from the fact that the majority might not want to live like this. And also violence if there is resistance towards that order. And from violence at January 6th to the violence we see now towards migrants, people of color in the streets of the US, people that are taken in by masked ICE agents and civilian clothing right off the street, until attacking the rights of LGBTQ people and pregnant people. All of these are expressions of white nationalism. But let's look at the different factions who nominally gathered under the banner of Christian National in the MAGA coalition. On the one hand, we have the religious right. That's kind of obvious. In the background, you see the three main branches. We don't have the time to go into that in detail, but it might be important to keep in mind the religious right does not just contain white evangelicals who are most vocal, but also other types of faith play a role there. So who do we see in Trump's cabinet? There's an obvious example is Pete Hegseth, a former Fox News moderator who is now the Secretary of Defense. He called for an American crusade. You see a few quotes on screen. He's accused of rape. He's part of a reformed radical faith who believes that women have to submit to men in marriage. And someone who is part of Hegseth's congregation minimized rape and slavery. And Hegseth wants to make the American army a Christian army. He also talked about that in his books. He wants to fight enemies of God abroad as well in the US. And he calls Donald Trump as a crusader-in-chief, which he thinks is a compliment. That's quite obvious here. Hegseth, as a Secretary of Defense, recently led a preacher in the White House, and as you can see, that person also comes from the Reformation Radical podcast. That name is their mission for the theological content that they're talking about there. And looking at all of this, Hegseth is dangerous, but he's a Fox News moderator who sold soap in the shape of hand grenades on Instagram, for real. So the man is dangerous, but I would not call him the brain of Trump's cabinet. This title belongs to someone else called Russell Vaughn in the Office for Budget Management. Even in the first Trump administration, he had that role, and he is one of the main architects of Project 2025. You might remember that's the authoritarian playbook for a next Republican government, which plans an attack on American democracy in all different facets. Russell Vaughn is a self-declared Christian nationalist, which is interesting. Often this is a label put on from the outside, but he says Christian nationalism is good and it should be part of government. And he assumes that the U.S. was subjugated by a Marxist shadow state before Trump's being in office. Shadow state, deep state is a QAnon word which is often mentioned in Project 2025, so much for his worldview. On top of that, he's one of the main thinkers of the project to bring the independent administrative branches in line. He wants to put public servants in trauma that cannot be fired and make them quit. And looking at the mental state of some people in what's crosshairs, that seems to work. That's one of the groups. Then we have America First nativists. The America First group is gathered around Stephen Miller, Steve Bannon, and the man you see on top there is the border czar, Tom Homan, who was in charge of the mass deportations. These people have blood and ground politics, a racist project, and they want to do mass deportations as a scare tactic. Tom Homan is also one of the authors of Project 2025, and he makes quite clear that he wants to continue the mass deportations disregarding the judicial branch. Here is a clip where this is explained.
What's next?
Another flight every day. The teams are going to be out there every day. Every day, the men and women of ICE are going to be in the neighborhoods of this nation arresting criminal, illegal alien, public safety threats, and national security threats. Lawrence, you're not going to stop us. We made a promise to the American people. The President Trump has made a promise to American people. We're going to make this country safe again. I wake up every morning loving my job because I work for the greatest president in the history of my life, and we're going to make this country safe again. I'm proud to be a part of this administration. We're not stopping. I don't care what the judges think. I don't care what the left thinks. We're coming.
Mir egal, was die Richter sagen, was die Linke sagen.
I don't care what the judges say, what the leftists say, we're coming. So it's important to understand when we talk about this group, the goal of these America First people is an ethno-nationalist goal. So it's about creating a white, quote-unquote, people's body. And the term Christian is more sort of a cultural denomination and not really religious. And the next faction, the authoritarian tech elite from Silicon Valley. On this level, yeah, they're quite a new player on the American stage, even though their roots go back quite some way. So we're talking about Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel already in 2009 wrote in an essay that freedom and democracy are incompatible for him, and the result that he draws from that is to get rid of democracy. And in the text, he also said that women's right to vote was very bad for libertarians and a mistake. And of course, Elon Musk, I don't have to tell you, he's in the news all the time. And so, is he the boss of Doge or is he not? But he was very involved in this attack on independent administrative offices of the administrative state. And he was part of closing USAID, the development program, and all under the banner of trying to cut back on government overspending, which of course was clear from the beginning that was bullshit. And now we've gotten some estimations of what this, reduction of costs actually cost the U.S. government, and it took millions. It cost millions, and it didn't save any amount of money. And so people like Musk and Thiel, of course, are financially motivated, but I think it also goes beyond that. So the tech elite, they have global goals, and not just American goals like the America First people. So they're dreaming of this, global elite where these hyper-rich CEOs rule the world. And so that led to Bannon and Musk having fights, even fights in public, right? So, for example, the debate about having visa for highly qualified international workers to come to the U.S. And, of course, that's something that Musk likes, but Bannon is against because of his ethno-nationalist project. And so Bannon called Musk a parasitic illegal alien. And so that's one of those rifts that, drives this coalition apart. And so we shouldn't make the mistake of thinking of Musk as less racist or pro-immigrant, right? It's basically two different genres of racism. So with Steve Bannon, we have a classical white nationalist. And with Musk, we see a different take on racism. It's very elitist. He's obsessed with quote-unquote race science, which of course is pseudoscience and not a real science. He's obsessed with IQ numbers and thinks of wealth as an indicator for IQ. And that explains a lot about how he behaves himself. But Yeah, we're talking about these different coalitions of the American right. And so they have similarities and differences between the religious right and the tech elite. And Elon Musk is a pro-natalist. So he wants to see some birth numbers rise, but not all birth numbers. And so that's a similarity with the religious right, because the religious right also cares deeply about the decline of birth rates. And in the 1990s, there was this World Congress of Families, which was founded back then because they were afraid of a so-called demographic winter, which is code for white babies. So when we talk about birth rates, it's always about like anti-immigration and racism. And so not just there's also a millionaire couple from Silicon Valley. It's not just Musk who talk about wanting a specific sort of babies. And they also have this eugenic worldview. Again, like IQ, it's pseudoscience, it's racist. But these people think that people with a high IQ should propagate more often in order to save humanity. And this couple, the Collinses, they're quite well known because the father hit his 2-year-old son in front of a reporter. So it's not about like treating children well or children's rights. It's a eugenic project. And so this couple had a fight with the religious right because just like Musk, which we've heard from his daughter, Vivian, recently, they use in vitro fertilization, IVF. And they also select like the embryos that they want to actually carry to term. And again, the Collinses, according to their own statements, go by IQ to select the embryos. And so the American right are against IVF because they think of life already beginning at insemination. And the religious right wants to have more children, but it always should be in the name of like a heterosexual Christian marriage, right? And so these dividing lines, I saw that last year at a conference in the US. And here we have Emma Waters, which was she works for the Heritage Foundation, and she was covered in the New York Times recently. And she told Elon Musk, it's so great that you have so many children, but you should really have them within a Christian marriage. Pronatalism needs God. And so the Collins couple, they were in the audience back then, and then they got up and left. And so we can see that's one of those lines of conflict that separates these factions. And so now we've heard that Elon Musk is supposedly taking a step back from Doge, which he wasn't really the head of, apparently. But still, this Collins couple, they still have access to the White House. And we can see that when we look at this report by the New York Times, because they wrote that the White House wants to raise birth rates. And they also write that this Collins couple, they're in talks with the White House and giving them suggestions. And so apparently the White House is thinking about introducing a medal, which they would give to mothers of more than 6 children. And I have to draw the historical parallels here in this room. And so, yeah, that's very clear, right? And a small media criticism, Republicans want more parents at home. It's not about more parents at home, it's about more mothers at home. But, yeah. So we can see the dividing lines in this coalition, but also that they are able to work together in spite of that. And so Simone Collins, the mother from this couple, she said in an interview she's gonna continue to having children until like her body gives up, and so she basically wants to die during childbirth, I guess. And so you could look at that as a personal decision that Simone Collins made for herself. If she wasn't part of a movement and in contact with the White House, a movement that tries to regulate the self-determination, bodily self-determination of women. In the state of Georgia, there's currently a woman being kept alive. She's brain dead. She was brain dead in the 9th week of the pregnancy, but she's pregnant. And it's unclear whether the embryo will survive the birth eventually. If she were a donor, they couldn't actually take her organs, but we can see that a pregnant woman actually has less rights in Georgia right now than an organ donor. And that's something we have to keep in mind. So these people, the Collinses, the Heritage Foundation, are still in contact with the current US government and are still working on their project. And so now we could say that, all right, Elon Musk is out, who's going to follow him? We remember this bearded guy, Russell Ruswald, and who believes in a shadow state, in a deep state, and he's supposedly to follow Musk in leading Doge. And in my podcast, Flag and Cross, I recently talked to my co-host about what we were expecting from this government and what was surprising to us. And we were expecting to, like, one of these factions actually to take the reign. And Thomas, my co-host, said it was so weird that all of these factions at once got the green light to go ahead and do their thing. And so that led to this sort of feeling of victory and feeling of being finally able to pull through. And so you might think that an opposition party might be able to use the rifts, the dividing lines within these factions, and that didn't happen. And why that didn't happen is a different topic. But some closing words. I think it's very important to stay analytical and to use the correct terms. A historian, Marcy Shaw, she said they're trying to establish a fascist dictatorship, and they're trying to cover up that the American right isn't a monolithic bloc, a monolithic faction. And media don't have to give in to every, and I want to give an example here. This AI-generated image of Trump as Pope. And a colleague of mine, Anthea Butler, if you just, look at that as provocation, if you read that as, well, you don't have to take that seriously, right? Then you gloss over a very important element, because that's the president of the USA claiming sort of godlike status. And that's an important element to understand how Trump works and how the coalition behind him works. It's going to be a long 4 years. It might be even longer than that. Thank you for listening.